This happened to me and my friends in the fall of 2008. We were all 12 years old at the time and thought we were invincible, disregarding rules and things like that. There were 4 of us on the basketball court that night. All of us saw it. There's no way it was one of those cases of mistaken identity that people don't believe always chalk it up to be. We all know damn well what we saw that night. I'm still friends with all 3 of the boys that were with me. We still talk about it with each other. Our wives know about what we saw. Our kids will know when they're older. I like to be honest with my kids, especially with these things because it looks so dangerous. Like it was able to kill you without much effort at all. My name is Steve, and this is what happened that night. It was late September in 2008. If you've never been to Maine in the fall, you should really see it one day. It's beautiful. The time had just switched over, so it was dark earlier, and that just meant me and my friends were outside after dark longer. We all lived in this housing area that butted up against a stretch of woods at the back of it. At the front was more of a suburban area. We used to spend hours and hours exploring those woods, and it got to the point where we could navigate them fairly easy. In between the woods and the houses, though, was a little park that usually only had people from our houses there, because I don't think a lot of other people even knew about it. The park had your typical swings and bars and slides for the younger kids, a tennis court, a path to walk your dog and whatnot, and a basketball court. Exploring the woods was definitely our favorite pastime, but playing basketball on that court in the park had to come in second place. If we weren't in the woods, we were on that court. It was me and my 3 friends, Chris, Dave, and Marty. We were always together. So that night, we were playing a game of 2-on-2, and it started to get dark. This didn't bother us. Like I said, we spent a lot of time outside, even after dark. We were boys that liked to be outside. The park had a dawn to dusk rule that meant it was only open during daylight hours. At the time, we all thought it was to prevent people from doing things they weren't supposed to do, like smoking or vandalizing. But after that night, I don't know what to believe. Maybe the people that built those houses and that park knew. Now, even though there was this rule at the park, there wasn't anyone around to make sure people were following the rules, and even at 12 we knew that. So we just kept playing as the sky started to get darker. There were lights around that would light up on timers or something when it got dark, so we just decided to keep playing until one of our teams won. For the sake of details, it was me and Marty against Chris and Dave, even though I'm not sure that's important to know. If it wasn't for Dave's shoe needing to be tied, though, I'm not sure we would have figured out something was going on before it was too late. Maybe it was fate or something, or maybe it was just dumb luck. But anyways, Dave stopped to tie his shoe, and since we weren't distracted by the game, we were able to realize how weird the place seemed. I'm not talking about it being spooky because the sun was going down or anything. We'd been out there more times than I can count after sunset. What I'm talking about was the whole atmosphere of the place being off. For starters, it was dead quiet, like when you're taking a test in school kind of quiet. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of living in Maine, there are all kinds of animals here. The forest behind us was never quiet, even at night. It was like during the day, there were one group of animals chirping and calling, and then when the sun set, they clocked out for the day and the second shift started. That night, it was like they all disappeared. That was the first spooky thing that I noticed. I think I said something like, "Dude, where did all the animals go?" I remember the 3 of them standing up and looking around. We were as quiet as the forest at that point. The next thing I noticed was how the air actually felt like static electricity or something. My skin just felt weird. It's hard to explain actually, but nowadays I compare it to when you have too much coffee and you feel jittery. After the encounter, Chris had told us that right before that dogman showed up, when we were all feeling weird, he actually felt nauseous and resisting the urge to throw up. And then the growling started. Now, there are bears here. Not too many in my specific area, but black bears are very common in a lot of Maine. I had lived in that house my entire life, and there had been a handful of bears seen around there, so that was the first thing I thought. But it just didn't sound right to me. It sounded deeper and sort of angry. And wouldn't you know it, it sounded like it was coming from the shadowy part of the park that the lights didn't touch. I remember Marty saying, "Guys, what's that?" in a whisper. He was scared. I could tell. I think we all were. The growls started off low, like when a dog is giving you that first warning, but then they got louder and louder. Whatever it was didn't sound like it was moving, though. It was like it wanted to stay in those shadows. I think it likes being able to hide. Now, all of our instincts told us to run, to get the hell out of there before it got any closer, but running from any type of predatory animal is not good. If it was a bear, then the four of us should yell, act big, and try to scare it away. And then this smell hit us. Chris admitted later that he actually vomited a little in his mouth because it was so terrible. It was the worst smell I have ever smelled to this day. It was like stale animal pee mixed with rotting garbage and meat that had gone bad and sat out in the sun. And then this thing finally stepped into the light, and the four of us gasped loudly and audibly at the same time. I wanted to scream and run away. It looked just like the werewolf from Silver Bullet. It was tall, probably 7 or 8 feet, and I'm not exaggerating. It dwarfed us. Even from the distance between us and it made me feel tiny. This thing was shaggy, like a wolf. Same colors too, those browns and grays. Its head was massive, like a bear. The muzzle was really long. Its mouth was open in a snarl, lips pulled way back and bearing these teeth that I will never forget. Those teeth looked like they existed for one thing: to kill. It had these long, pointed ears that looked like they had tufts of fur at the ends. I don't think I need to say that it was on 2 legs, right? Because obviously it was. It looked like it was all muscle, big and toned. The legs were thick and strong and looked like they were built for speed and maybe carrying heavy loads of weight. It's what you called digitigrade when we were talking, standing on its toes. The arms came past the knees, long and disproportionate looking from the front paws. It didn't look like the back ones either. The back paws were very canine. The front paws were more human-like. They looked like they could grab things easily. Those are the details that I remember. I've seen that thing in my nightmares for over a decade. So this werewolf or dogman or whatever you want to call it, it's standing there in the light of the park, just staring at us with what I can only describe as this smirk. It looked like it said, "I'm real, and I like that you're afraid of me." And then Dave yells out, "What in the hell is that?" And this thing roared so loud that my hand shot up to my ears without me even thinking about doing it. I couldn't help but yell too, except mine was definitely from fright. I wanted to run. I wanted to get away from there and lock myself in the house, but my legs didn't seem to work. They wouldn't move. I was literally frozen in terror. I know a lot of times people say your fight or flight instinct take over when you see some kind of creature like this, but let me tell you, there's another option. Shock. Being frozen. Being so scared that your body can't even make itself move. I remember Chris just repeating, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," over and over. And then this thing slapped its chest with both hands like it was telling us to fight it. It was like you see gorillas do on TV, like it was challenging us or trying to intimidate us. Let me tell you, it was working. Believe me. It just continued to snarl at us too. Dave told us to run on the count of 3, but I didn't know if I could. But he counted anyways, and when he got to 3, he flung the basketball towards that thing, and we all started to run. I guess that was all I needed for my legs to move, because I was not being left out there by myself. I don't know what happened after Dave threw the ball. I didn't look back. I ran as fast as I could. We all did, all the way to Marty's house, since that was the closest to us. I remember crowding at the door, yelling at him to open it, but we were crowding him so much that he couldn't actually open the damn door. and when he finally did open the door, all four of us burst inside and slammed the door shut. His parents were home. At first, they just thought we were being rowdy, but after one look at us, they knew something was wrong, and we all started talking at the same time. We were hysterical. Marty's dad finally got us to shut up, and I was the one to tell him what happened. Chris was looking through the blinds towards the park, trying to figure out where it was, or if it was coming for us. Marty's dad looked at me like I was crazy while I was telling him what happened, but Marty's mom just looked worried. She was sure we saw some kind of large carnivore, but she wasn't buying the werewolf part. They knew we were terrified, though, because all of us refused to go outside, even when Marty's dad offered to drive us home. It was only a 5-minute walk to our farthest house, but we were not going back outside. Marty's mom called our parents, just telling them we saw something at the park and that we were scared. They all came to get us. All the dads went out there, armed of course, looking for a bear or wolf, but they didn't find it. What they did find, though, was the basketball. Shredded. We're talking all clawed up and basically ripped in half. After that, we refused to go to the park or the woods, even during the day. A good year and a half went by without us going out there until we finally got the nerve to go out there again, I guess. We hadn't seen that dogman again the whole time and hadn't heard anything about it, so we felt like maybe it was safe enough to go back out there. We went through high school without any problems and continued to go back out there until we moved away one by one, all to the city, away from that park. It was so long ago now, but I could still remember that fear. I can remember everything about that encounter, actually. Sightings of cryptids stay with you your whole life. Luckily, all that happened was that thing scared the hell out of us 4 boys. I've heard of worse encounters. We were lucky. Exploring the woods is still a huge part of my life, and I've shared that with my family, but I teach them to always be aware of what's around them. Their lives could depend on it. I'm not sure what that thing wanted that night. I've read a lot about them, maybe just liking to scare people, and maybe it was that. I don't know if it chased us or just destroyed our basketball. Like I said, I didn't look back, and neither did my 3 friends. We all just wanted to get out of there. I know it didn't follow us home, that's for sure, because Chris was watching out the window the entire time. I don't know if it even stuck around after scaring the hell out of us. Maybe it was just bad luck to run into it that night because it was just passing through. Who knows? Thanks for giving people like me a safe spot to tell their tales. Sorry this email's so long. It actually took me a couple of days to type it out, but I didn't want to miss any details. Steve, in Maine. In the fall of 2011, about 15 miles north of Klamath Falls in Oregon, I was chased by something that has given me nightmares for the past 13 years. Everybody out there calls this thing a dogman. Until I knew what a dogman was, I was adamant that I was chased down the street by a werewolf. Until I found out what a dogman was, I kept asking myself if I was going crazy, because werewolves are things that just don't exist, right? The more I researched, though, the more I found that these things are seen all over the world, especially in areas that are wooded, as is the case of my own encounter. I don't want to tell you my name, because I'm a prominent member of the community that I live in. I will tell you that I'm a dentist by trade, and I have a very esteemed position, so you can imagine, if word got out that I saw something like this and people chose not to believe my encounter, I could be ridiculed, possibly even lose my job. I mean, who wants their teeth treated by someone who swears they saw a werewolf, right? When I had this encounter, I was only 20 years old and still living with my mom. My dad had passed 2 years prior, so it was just the 2 of us. I was coming home from visiting a family friend one evening when this happened. This is how my encounter goes. I was driving down the road, minding my own business, just cruising at about 40 miles per hour. I didn't have any music on because I was lost in thought over a boy. That part seems so trivial now, but it was important at the time, so I'll add that to my story just for the sake of it. The sun was almost setting, but the sky hadn't turned that beautiful orange color just yet. Then, out of nowhere, this giant dark mass runs out in front of me from this patch of trees that were extremely close to the road. I screamed, not knowing what it was at first, but assuming it was some kind of natural animal, and I swerved into the other lane to avoid hitting it. All of this happened so quick. I was completely caught off guard. Like I said, I thought it was an animal at first, but then I looked as this thing sprinted after me on the driver's side of my car, and what I saw made me scream again. This looked like the largest wolf I had ever seen in my entire life, but something was just different about this animal. The shoulders were wide. It had an extremely large head, long ears on the top of its head, and a large bushy tail. It was a chocolate brown color, but there were areas of the fur that were mixed with this tan or blonde color. At first, this thing was sprinting next to my car on four legs, and I thought to myself, it was just an extremely large wolf that was chasing my car. The area where I live, there are a few dogs that always get out of the yards and chase cars, so I wasn't unfamiliar with this type of attitude, but just looking at this creature, I could tell deep inside my gut that something wasn't right. And then my suspicions were confirmed, because to my horror, this thing is chasing me on four legs, and it slowly starts to shift in position, and all of a sudden, I see this thing is sprinting next to my car on two legs. I don't know what kind of creature can run on two legs, let alone just transition from four legs to two without even stopping, but this creature did that. And I look as it's chasing me now on two legs, running like a man would run. I screamed again, because what I was looking at now reminded me of the classic werewolf movies that you see on TV. I was speechless. I was petrified. I was starting to pray, something I hadn't done since my dad died. I didn't know what to do besides keep driving, but I also needed to look at this animal. So now I'm in the disposition of keeping my eyes on the road and keeping my eyes on this animal that was chasing me. An animal that, to my beliefs, shouldn't exist. Besides the sheer terror of watching this creature on two legs run next to me, there were several points of this that were so disturbing to me. The first was how fast this thing was keeping pace with me. I was going about 40 miles per hour, as I noted earlier. This thing was easily keeping pace. The second thing that terrified me, though, was the smile on this creature's face. A truly evil, disturbing smile. It was like a person that's doing something malignant, knowing that he's being watched doing this action and not caring. To me, this creature looked sentient. It looked intelligent, and that smile looked like it was enjoying itself. I know these details are hard to believe, but trust me, these creatures are capable of a higher form of thought than most animals are. I was so scared, I started screaming again and again, not knowing what else to do. I was over-panicked. I was hysterical. And this thing was just so agile. It looked like it could beat out the fastest track star to ever grace the Olympics and do it with ease. On two legs, this thing was just enormous. I mean, it had to be 8 feet tall. The broad shoulders I saw while it was running on four legs gave way to a massively broad chest. The arms were so long and buff, and the strides it could take with these incredibly powerful looking legs was just insane. I think that's one of the reasons it was so fast, was because of how big the leg span of this thing was. I sped up, and this thing sped up as well, but as I continued to speed up, the creature started to fall behind me, thankfully. But again, another disturbing fact is that it did not give up its pursuit of me. I continued to drive, and this thing continued to chase after me, even though I was gaining more and more ground between myself and it. At 65 miles an hour, I was going so quick, I was afraid I was going to crash, and I couldn't risk going any faster. This road is very windy, and now the sun was setting, and the light from the setting sun was glaring into my eyes. I had one hell of a time keeping track of this thing and keeping my eyes on the road. And then, by the grace of God, this thing darted off to the other side of the road and back into that wooded area. I just kept driving, though, my heart pounding out of my chest. I was sweating profusely, and I was sobbing. I've never been this scared in my entire life, and my mind was going a million miles a minute, just trying to figure out what I saw. My logical brain was trying to come to terms with something illogical that I had just witnessed with my own two eyes. I drove all the way home over the speed limit. I didn't even care if I got pulled over or if I got a ticket. I just needed to get out of that car and into the safety of my own home. And through all of it, all I wanted to be was with my mom. When I got home, I ran into the house, still hyperventilating and crying, and my mom came into the living room, frantically asking me if I was okay. She was worried. I was panicked. I'm her only daughter. I'm her only child. She'd never seen me like that. My parents raised me tough, but after seeing something like that, I just broke down. She told me I was so pale it looked like I'd seen a ghost, but I corrected her and said, more like a werewolf. She asked me what I was talking about, and I told her everything that had just happened, expecting her not to believe me, expecting her to tell me that it was my imagination or that I saw some other type of animal and my imagination was running wild. I mean, how could I try to convince her of what I saw when I was still trying to convince myself of what I saw? Luckily, though, my mom knows that I never lie, and she believed the story that I told her. She didn't know what I saw, and I didn't know what I saw, but I was satisfied with the fact that my mom believed me. I had some really close friends that I told about this too, and these crazy sons of bitches wanted to actually go out and investigate and see if they could find anything. I told them that I would not be joining them, that this thing was terrifying, and I didn't want to ever see it again. I begged them not to go, but they stupidly chose to go look for this creature anyway. They didn't see anything themselves, and they ended up coming back disappointed, but I was just glad they came back at all. I saw what this thing looked like, and I could tell what it was capable of, and I didn't want my friends to go out there and become the next victim of some werewolf-type creature that was out there. Needless to say, I never drive down there if I can avoid it, and in fact, I haven't driven there at night since the encounter. I drive completely out of the way if I need to go in that direction after the sun sets, and I don't even care. But after that encounter, I admit I became a little obsessed with the notion of werewolves being real and started to reach out to different groups on whatever social media we had back then. I think it was Facebook or something, or some other messaging system where I could join a group, and I eventually came into contact with two different people that lived in the same area that claimed to have had similar experiences to mine. The first one, there were people out in the woods just having fun, going out there to party or whatever, and they heard what they described as screams from hell. They also heard deep growling and smelled some horrible smell and were chased out of that area pretty soon after they got there. None of them had actually got visual evidence of this thing, though. Like I said, they weren't out there for a very long time, but they were in the relatively same spot as me. They had parked their cars and looked around, and either they were lying to me or experienced something along the same lines of what I saw. The other gentleman that I came into contact with did have a visual encounter. He lived in that area and had seen something pretty similar. His encounter was similar to mine too, having seen it on the road right around the same area, and because I was skeptical at first, I didn't give him any details of what it was that I saw. I asked him what he saw, and to my astonishment, he described almost the exact same creature that I did. He told me what he saw was a really big dog on the road, or at least what he thought was a dog at first. But as he passed by it, it looked more like a giant wolf than anything else. Now, his encounter didn't have this creature stand up on two legs, but he did say it was a dark brown color and had really big shoulders and also a really big head. He also commented on a big bushy tail that he saw. Like I said, it sounds pretty similar to mine, right? Although I don't think it was as scary as what I went through. Other than that, he didn't really have any details because the encounter that he experienced was so brief. He wasn't chased or anything like that. This thing was just on the side of the road and darted back into the woods as soon as he passed by. You know, I never thought twice about this kind of stuff until I saw one for myself. My eyes are open now and I know what's out in the forest. I've read that you can get obsessed with them after you have an encounter, and I agree with that completely. I feel like I think about it a lot, even to this day. I know they're real, and it's not something that I can push out of my mind. Sometimes I even still have nightmares about the creature that chased me on the road that night. The area where I saw it was actually a huge forest area, and I think these creatures like the forest habitat. If you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, they are very wolf-like, so maybe their instincts are the same as a wolf? There's plenty of game out in those woods that it can feed off of too. I read also that these creatures like to run out in front of cars, either as a game or to possibly hunt. I think that's really scary. I don't know of anybody that's ever gone missing around that area though, or at least not missing to the point where a monster could have gotten them. But I do think that the forest is an easy habitat for them to live in. There's lots of trees that can cover them and hide their existence. There's plenty of food, and these forests stretch on for hundreds and hundreds of miles, so it's possible that they can use the entire forest as their hunting ground, or their territory, or even a way of getting from place to place. I want to thank you for sharing this. It actually helps talking about it, and it's a massive weight off my shoulders being able to tell you what happened and knowing that you're going to leave my name out of it. This is actually the first time I've ever shared this encounter with a stranger, and I'm glad you wanted to share it for me. Sincerely, Anonymous. Hello, and thank you for creating this channel. It's amazing how many people have encounters, and I see how talking about it helps so many, mentally and emotionally. Fortunately, neither me nor my family were negatively affected by the Dogman encounters. My name is Danielle J. My mom is an eyewitness to what I have researched to be the Dogman. When it happened, it was the summer of 2000 to 2001 in Rock County, Wisconsin, on Lake Koshkonong. I do not want to name the exact village where this occurred, as the beach is private to its residents, and I want to respect the land and the people who still reside there. I was 12 years old when it happened. My brothers, mom, and her boyfriend were watching a movie in the living room, and my mom said she wanted to take her new mountain bike down to the lake for a bike ride. It was beautiful outside, and my mom often walked or rode during the evening as she worked second shift. She left for her ride, and I continued watching the TV, lying on my belly with a pillow under my head. Not 10 minutes later, though, the front door flew wide open, slamming into the wall of the living room. It was startling because we were renting the house and my mom was constantly reminding me not to slam the door so we could keep the place in nice condition to get our deposit back. The fact that she slammed it open, I knew something was seriously wrong. After she came bursting into the living room, she was visibly out of breath, shaken, mumbling in a high-pitched voice saying things like, "Oh my god, there was this black thing. Red eyes. It was big. Holy shit." She was gasping for air between every word, and I was in complete shock. My mom has never lied to me, and she had no reason to freak us out on purpose. My mom and I loved watching horror movies and being scared on purpose, but the way she was acting was just different than any horror movie that got us up in arms. I'd never seen her petrified in my life. She had to catch her breath and calm down as her boyfriend tried to comfort her. My oldest brother said he actually wanted to drive down to the spot where she saw that thing and investigate to see if he could see it too. My mom begged him not to go outside, but he was hard-headed and felt the need to go. So my mom and my brother both drove down to the beach. Mind you, this location wasn't even 100 yards from our house. We rented the last house on the edge of a gravel road that led to the beach. I stayed inside, mildly terrified, but mostly confused, because how could anything from the movies actually be down on the road, especially that close to our house? They returned home a few minutes later, and I asked if they saw anything. They both said when they drove past the spot where my mom saw that thing, they both saw two glowing red eyes moving back into the bushes away from the car. This road is a sand road parallel to the lake and has 4 small gravel roads that lead down to it perpendicularly. The sand road is about the width of a standard car, give or take several inches. This is important to note later. After they got back and calmed down, my mom recounted her experience. She stated she was riding her bike down to the lake along the sandy road. Her mountain bike had new tread on the tires, so the ride was casual and unassuming like the others that she had taken. As she approached the second perpendicular gravel road, there's a single streetlight on the corner of this road. Beyond this light pole is pure darkness, and the roads lead past 2 more roads and then a swampy forest area that's undeveloped due to flooding every year. She said that once she approached this line of light and shadow from the single light post, something jumped out onto the middle of the road beyond the light in the shadow. She stopped her bike and put her feet on the ground. She said this creature was black, darker than the shadows itself. At first, she thought it was someone messing with her in a dog or gorilla fursuit. She stated it had long arms that almost touched the ground. It was hunched over, meeting her height at 5'3". She said this creature swayed back and forth like it was preventing her from passing. Then she said it jumped from one side of the road to the other, back and forth. Now remember, this road is more than the width of a car. It maintained eye contact with her while it did this. She said she was so terrified that she did a dumb thing that all girls in scary movies do. She slowly got off her bike and started walking backwards away from this creature. But the creature didn't move. And then my mom said to me, "Danielle, I turned around on my bike and never pedaled so hard or fast in my life. It was so stupid, but I just booked it." Now, I remember later that week, I tried looking creatures up on the internet and found weird Wisconsin and a similarity between the chupacabra and what my mom saw. At the time, dogman wasn't really a term that I knew yet. I knew that there were inconsistencies but had nothing else to go off of. I was curious to uncover more about this creature. I walked down to the spot where my mom had seen the creature. I remember being scared but more curious than anything. Now, in her area of the sighting, between these perpendicular roads are willow saplings and trees and other bushes. There's ditches or creek beds that flow to the lake. My mom said the creature retreated into one of those ditches where her and my brother drove by. So I walked around the ditch on both sides searching for hair or prints, the actual creature, or anything I could find to prove that this thing existed and figure out what it was. What I found were all these deep prints. The sand was dried out, so I couldn't make out much detail, but I could see that they were deep. After searching for a few moments, I saw large prints with features. It was about 6 to 7 inches wide, and about that long too. These prints had 3 pads spread out like a turkey, but it had a point on the end of each pad. Now I've seen turkey pads and turkey dusting spots, but this was absolutely not the same thing. These prints were about 3 inches deep into the sand. I would say possibly deeper if it were a fresh print. I was so confused, but also so delighted that I found something. I didn't cast the print because, hey, I was only 12 years old, but I just wanted to see something. Now though, I wish I had got the material to cast that print. Later that week, my friend Jamie told me he saw the same thing that I said my mom had seen down the same road. I don't remember telling him about it, but apparently I did. I remember Jamie had this excited look in his eyes like he really believed that it happened. I didn't believe him and felt like he was pulling my chain, but he said his friend saw it too, on the same day. We never spoke of it again, but looking back, I think I believe him now. It wasn't until a few months ago did I piece together what I saw and that it was called the Dogman, and that it had history, like thousands of sightings, and it just felt validating to me. I listened to a creepypasta story about the Dogman creature, and of course those stories are fiction, but the descriptions were spot on to what my mom told me. Then, after searching my YouTube, I stumbled across your channel. That's why I'm choosing to publicly share my story for the first time ever. After finding this channel, I started recounting other strange occurrences that I'd experienced in that area. During the same time period, I remember one night there was a really bad thunderstorm in the evening. Like I said, my mom worked the second shift, so she wasn't home yet, and I was all alone. I remember the lights went out, and I was watching TV in the living room as I always did. I remember I heard thunder and lightning, and it didn't creep me out really, until the lights went out. After that, there was a very loud banging on the side window of the house that faced our backyard, which was facing that lake. Our house was built into a hill as the lake was at the bottom of the hill, at the end of the road in the village. The window was about 6 feet above the ground, and I was so terrified that the sound from the window could possibly be somebody outside. But I thought it couldn't have been thunder because it was just the window that was making these loud banging noises. It was too far off the ground for a person to reach. If a person was doing that, why would they be doing so in a really, really bad storm in the middle of the country, by the lake, and at night? There's other easier places to go scare somebody. These thoughts swarmed my head as I stared at the window. The blinds were down, and I just stared at them in the dark. I'd heard many stories now of this exact same thing happening to others, but I never put it together until now that it might have been that same dogman that my mom saw. Another strange thing happened in 2017, a week after my brother passed away. This was the same brother that had driven my mom down to her encounter that I previously stated. We held a balloon vigil for him at the same beach of my mom's encounter. We grew up there, and it's a place that's always been home to me. As we light our flying candles up into the air, I remember the sky was clear and it was cool. No clouds, and it was October. All of a sudden, my mom said, "Oh my God, look at that." In the sky, a few small clouds had formed with a perfect cross shape missing in the center of the clouds. It was literally like someone took a cookie cutter out of the cloud in the shape of a perfect cross. I know this sounds unbelievable. If I wasn't there, I wouldn't believe it myself. My mom took a photo on her phone, and to this day she keeps it on her fridge to remind her of my brother. I can't blame her. I'm not a religious person, nor do I believe in institutions of religion, but this event felt like some kind of unreal spiritual event to us. Other strange things had happened in the area, but I can't remember all of them. We had strange phone calls at the house and saw some things in the lake at night. It's just one of those places that everything anomalous seems to happen. I've also heard of this theme being commonplace in sightings of the Dogman. Who knows? Maybe Anubis is really what we're seeing as Dogman, and he's keeping sacred portals to the afterlife protected or something. In my teachings, it's said that they are keepers of burial mounds. I do want to emphasize this. I hear of many people talking about burial mounds and the Dogman in the same sentence. If I can give you one takeaway after all of this, is if you experience Dogman, offer tobacco in the location you saw it. Offer understanding and respect if you can. Honor the land where it walks and protect its habitat. That's pretty much it. Good luck with the channel, and thank you for sharing my story. Miigwech, Danielle. Hi, Tales of the Supernatural. My name is Duncan, and I have a really scary story to tell you. This happened to me and my wife Melinda in 2009. We were living in a house in Northern California when it happened. Melinda and I had bought the house because it was away from town and we were private people. There were other houses around, but they weren't too close, and when we found it, it was the perfect place to raise a family one day. Everything was great there for about a year, until one night all of that changed and we found ourselves no longer able to live in the house of our dreams. What happened to us was just too terrifying for any possibility of staying in that house. We were just too afraid that that thing would come back. Back when this happened, we were both in our early 30s. Melinda was working at the post office and I was working for the accounting department of an electricity company. The night of our sighting, it had been raining all day long and all the way into the night. We were having dinner, just the two of us, as back then we didn't have any children, when our dog Malcolm started acting funny. Malcolm was a Malamute cross. He was big and strong and weighed probably 90 pounds in his prime. At the time of this encounter, he was 5 years old and in great shape. Usually, when we ate dinner, he would just sit at one of our feet begging for some food and would be as quiet as a mouse. He would just lay there, eyeballing us, waiting for us to either drop something or hand him something, and then he would be on cloud 9. That night, though, he popped up to his feet and started growling and pacing back and forth at the wall in the dining room. That wall backed up to our backyard, which was very big. There was no fence back there, and it butted up to a lot of open land. For miles and miles was a forest that you could walk through and explore all day long and not even see half of it. It was a beautiful place, very quiet and very serene. It was one of the things we loved most when we bought the house. There was so much land we could explore behind it. Of course, we didn't own that part of the forest, it was publicly owned, but we basically had this entire area to ourselves unless one of our neighbors wandered over towards our house. So when Malcolm got up and started pacing at the wall, looking back on it, we think this thing came from that forested area behind the house. Eventually, we scolded him and told him to quiet down, as we thought there might just be some type of animal wandering around in the backyard. It happened numerous times. There's been deer going through it almost daily, even coyotes and bobcats, and not that we've seen any ourselves, but according to our neighbors, there had been some bears that wandered around in recent years. We just thought it was one of those creatures and brushed it off as Malcolm being a doofus. But then later, probably an hour or two after dinner, we were sitting on the couch together watching a movie, and Malcolm started going absolutely nuts. Now usually he's a very relaxed dog. He's loving, and he'll just sit there for hours, letting you pet his head or scratch his back, even if you're a complete stranger. But at this moment, he was going apeshit. We adopted Malcolm when he was 9 weeks old. It was from an animal shelter where we used to live, so we've had him his whole life, and I had never, ever seen him like this before. He went from a laying position on the couch next to Melinda to jumping off the couch and sprinting over to one of the walls. And there he was barking like mad. He was very aggressive and very, very hyped up. Now, even though he growls occasionally at some kind of animal that's passing through, he never acted like this before, and I figured he was barking for a good reason. So stupidly, I went outside to check. At this point, it's still pouring down rain. I opened the door to take a look, and Malcolm actually sprinted past me, damn near knocking me down in the process. He ran out into the trees, over to the side of the house, barking and growling like crazy. I yelled at him to come back, but he would not listen. I yelled a few more times, demanding that he come back, but he was out of sight by then. All I could hear were his barks in the woods. I was worried, and it was pouring. I didn't want him to get lost out there in the middle of the night, especially with the way he was acting. For some reason, my nerves were just on edge by the way he was acting. I think it was my gut trying to tell me that something was wrong, but like an idiot, I ignored it, and I ignored my dog's warnings. I grabbed my rain jacket, and Melinda followed me, and we both ran into the trees calling our dog, both absolutely worried. We were running with flashlights, calling his name and trying to get him to come back. Even being out there for just a few minutes, we were already completely soaked. As we ran through the forest, calling for our dumb dog, the flashlights were just bouncing around and not actually doing any good because of how we were running and pointing them. We kept calling and calling for Malcolm, trying to get him to come back, or at least respond to us, but all we could do was follow the barks because he was definitely chasing something. And then we heard this weird screaming sound. You know, before I spoke with you, I couldn't describe it as anything other than some horrific scream, but when you told me to look up the clip of the American Werewolf in London scream, well, let me just tell you, I'm glad that I listened to that during the day. Because the scream in that movie and the scream that I heard that night out in the forest with Melinda were the exact same scream. Thank you for directing me towards that, because now I have a way of describing it for people that want to listen to my story. But anyway, we hear this screaming, and we're even more worried for Malcolm now, so instead of thinking about our own safety, we continue to run deeper into the woods looking for our damn dog. When we finally find him, he runs up to us, actually wagging his tail like an idiot, but then immediately turns around and gets super defensive again. He's snarling. His teeth are completely bared. He's very, very aggressive again, to the point where I thought he might actually turn around and bite one of us on accident. He was standing in this very small cleared area and snarling into the tree line, but even as aggressive as he was acting, he refused to go any further into those woods. I was able to leash him, but he was still very agitated, and I was finally able to coax him back towards the house after a little bit. But every few feet, he would turn around again and snarl into the darkness. I'm thinking to myself, what in the hell is out there that has him so upset? And as I'm tugging on him, trying to get him back into the house, Melinda's following us, keeping her flashlight pointed in the direction that the dog is snarling, just in case something was out there watching us. For all we knew, it was a mountain lion or a bear, but little did we know that it was something much scarier and far more unbelievable. As we're continuing to try to get Malcolm to the house, we hear what I can only describe as something big, snarling and following us. We could actually hear it splashing through the puddles and moving through the brush as we continued to go towards the house. At this point, I start thinking about how dumb we were running out into the middle of the night, following our dog who obviously caught the scent of something that he felt he needed to protect us against. We stopped for a second, and I told Melinda to just listen. And then Malcolm goes crazy again. He turns around into that defensive posture that he's been in, and he looks past Melinda, starts growling and barking and tugging on the leash to try to get away from me so he could go defend us or something. And then Melinda points the flashlight up higher and we see it. Now this thing was tall. Taller than myself, and for the record, I'm 6'2", and this thing looked like it must have been a good foot taller than me. It was covered in dark gray fur and had the head of a giant wolf. Except this thing was standing on two legs. It had long arms and big hands. It had long fingers on those hands and sharp claws at the ends of those fingers. If I had to describe the hands, they would look more like raccoon hands or possum hands. You know, the ones that look like they can actually hold on to things. It didn't appear to have paws to me on the front hands. For all intents and purposes, this thing looked exactly like the werewolf from Bad Moon, just taller. It actually raised its hands to block the light from the flashlight too. That was disturbing to me. But to make it worse though, this thing's lips were pulled back, revealing this horrifically sharp set of teeth. They were disturbingly sharp. And I swear to you, right now on a stack of Bibles, that it looked like this thing was actually smiling at us. It was just standing there, breathing in and out, and I could see its chest moving up and down, and steam coming from out of its mouth as it breathed. There was water pouring off its fur because it's still pouring outside. And my first instinct, I guess, is to just yell in fright. I didn't even think about yelling, but this guttural yell just came out of me. As I yell, Melinda screams this horrific scream at the top of her lungs. As I'm yelling and she's screaming, the dog is barking. We turn and we run for all we're worth back towards the house, not even looking back at this thing. Now, I know you shouldn't run from some kind of predatory animal, but I'd like to see anybody listening stand their ground when they're looking face to face with a werewolf. We run all the way back home. I have the leash in my hand, not even sure at this point that Malcolm is still attached to the leash, but I'm running for all I'm worth, holding Melinda's hand with my other hand, as she's the only person illuminating our way with her flashlight. I couldn't even tell you to this day what happened to the flashlight that I was carrying. We run through the forest, finally break into the clearing that's our backyard, and run for all we're worth towards the house. As we're running, I finally see Malcolm run past me and take a sigh of relief that our dog is there with us, because I didn't want him to get hurt by that thing. But I also knew that he could defend us with this creature, and he could also be an early warning system if it came back to the house. We rush inside, slam the door and lock it, grab the gun from the closet, not even caring that everything that we're touching is getting soaking wet, because we didn't even take off any of our wet clothes. Let me tell you, keeping a dry, clean house was the last thing on my mind at that point. The only time I actually pulled off that stupid jacket was when I finally realized that I still had it on, and it might get in the way of the shotgun. For maybe 5 minutes, hell, maybe 10 minutes, who knows, everything seemed calm, except Malcolm, who was still growling and whining at the door. We stood in the hallway, just looking back and forth at each other, not even talking, just breathing, terrified, not knowing what to do, or even thinking about what we just saw. I think we were both in shock. And then Malcolm goes apeshit again, and my heart fell out of my butt. He goes and starts digging at the bottom of the front door like he wants to get out, like he has to go to the bathroom or something, but The noises that he was making as he's digging were not an "I have to go outside to pee" type of noise. They're more like a "I need to go outside and fight off this creature that wants to kill mom and dad" type of noise. And then we heard something large walk up the stairs and across our porch. The way our porch is built, it covers the entire front of the house. So that would be the kitchen, a hallway, the living room, and a guest room up at the front of the house. So the porch goes across all 4 of those rooms, and it sticks out about 15 feet from the door to the yard, and has 4 steps going from the porch down to our walkway that connects to our driveway. The entire porch is made of wood, and we could hear this creature walking up the steps and start moving around the porch. And then the front door handle actually starts jiggling, like this creature knew what a damn doorknob was for. Answer me this, Tales of the Supernatural. What kind of creature can do that? I mean, how intelligent does this thing have to be to know what a doorknob is for? I was a mixture of dumbfounded and terrified when I realized that this thing could actually open up a door. Melinda grabbed onto my clothes, sobbing, thinking that this thing was going to come find a way in. And then something actually slams into the door. It was so loud it caused me to jump up in fright. Melinda screamed again, but I shushed her, telling her that we had to stay quiet so we could listen to where this thing was moving around, and so that hopefully it wouldn't know where we were. I had the shotgun ready just in case. She had a handgun just in case, although I'm not sure a handgun would do any good in this situation. As we listen, we can hear this thing continue to move around the porch, but then all of a sudden, Melinda screams as she looks into the kitchen. I look over there too, asking what's going on because I didn't see anything, and she swore that she saw something run by the window of the kitchen. The window that this creature ran by is on the other side of the wall to the kitchen, the one that you could see the forest through. We just continued standing in the hallway, moving around in a circle as we watched Malcolm run around confused. The poor dog is circling and whining and running from one wall to another, sniffing around and growling. And then we actually hear a thump come from the roof. This thing was up on the roof walking around. How? How in the hell could something do that? We have a 1-story house, so we could hear it just fine as it walked up around there. It would walk all the way to one end of the house. Then it would turn around and walk all the way across to the other side. As this thing is doing that, Malcolm is walking back and forth from one end of the house to the other, whining and growling and barking and looking up at the ceiling. At this point, we finally had the nerve to move out of the hallway for a second and call the police. We told them that there was some kind of wild animal outside of our house that was walking around on our roof and trying to get inside. They told us to stay inside, that they would send somebody as soon as they could, but the rain was bogging everything down. It was like a plot to a bad movie. They told us as long as we stayed in the house, we'd be okay. Yeah, right, I thought. If this thing wanted to get into the house, it would, and nothing was going to stop it. This went on for what felt like forever. I don't know what was taking the police so long. It would walk one way on the roof, turn around, and walk back the other way, over and over again. I don't even know what it was doing up there, unless it was just trying to scare the hell out of us. But poor Malcolm wouldn't sit down. So the 2 of us huddled in that hallway the entire time. The reason was because there were 2 exits there. One door that led to the front yard and one door that led to the backyard. If it came in one way, we would just go the other way. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like this thing was off the roof. Now, this has nothing to do with the Dogman encounter or Dogman in general, but I would like to point out that if you've seen the movie Signs, the way this thing was moving back and forth on the roof and on the porch sounded just like that. The pitter-patter of a creature that has flesh on the bottom of its feet. That's what it sounded like to me anyway. And then Malcolm ran to the back door and started digging up at the floor like he was at the front door and barking and growling again. He wanted to go out there, but there was no way in hell I was going to let that happen. After that, we heard a loud crash from the side of the house, which we later found out were the garbage cans that this thing had knocked over. And then the handle to the back door started jiggling too. I had the shotgun drawn on that door. If something came through it, I was going to pull the trigger as fast as I could and hopefully injure it enough for us to make a run for it. Melinda's still trying to hold Malcolm back from the door at this point, because she's so scared that something was going to come through the door. As she's trying to hold him, he kept pulling free and running back to the door, and she'd grab his collar and drag him back to where I was with the shotgun. Anytime she would try, she would slip and fall because everything was so soaking wet at this point. It slammed the door again, and let out this loud, deep, short growl, or maybe even a grunt, and I got the feeling that this thing was actually frustrated. I assume at that point, it ran around the house again, because now it was at the front door, and Malcolm was running towards the front door again. I heard it walking across the porch. Malcolm was right there growling, and then I heard something like flesh wiping against wet glass, and realized that this thing actually put its paw against the window. At that point, I thought it was going to come through the glass, and that was probably the moment that I was the most scared in this entire situation. For some reason, it wasn't breaking down the door, but was it going to come smashing through the window instead? I told Melinda that if that thing did come in, to run, to leave me behind, and I would distract it as long as I could to give her an opportunity to get out of there. I wanted her to get in the car and get the hell out. It jiggled the front door again. Then another slam of frustration, and that grunt. What kind of animal can do that? It was like it was self-aware and had some higher form of emotions than other animals do. And then this thing took off, I guess, because after that it was silent, and only a couple of minutes after that there was a knock on the door, which was the actual police. They finally arrived. There were 2 officers. They said they did catch the glimpse of some type of large animal running back into the forest. I asked them what they saw, and they said it looked like a large dog or a wolf. But on 2 legs, right? Is what I asked them, and they looked at me like I was stupid. Or crazy, or maybe both. And one of the officers said, "No, on 4 legs, sir," and just gave me this weird look. Melinda and I ended up staying inside while these 2 officers looked around the area for any signs of the animal, but there were no signs that they could find. I mean, it was so wet and rainy that any type of footprint would just fill up with water or get ruined, right? I think it would be too sunken in to make out any type of print. They left and told us to just be careful, to call us if it came back, and not to go outside for the rest of the night. That was not going to be a problem. We didn't even sleep that night. In fact, we didn't actually leave the hallway for a long time. We just sat there with our backs against the wall, still soaked, just listening for this thing to come back, making sure that Malcolm was okay. Melinda was laying against my chest, praying quietly as I listened for the sounds of that thing. I clutched that shotgun until the light started to rise. The next day, we went out to look around, and that's when we saw the garbages were knocked over, and stuff on the porch was even broken. We even saw a sapling that we had recently planted that looked like it was pulled right up from the ground. We moved shortly after that. We couldn't risk another run-in with that creature, especially if we wanted to start a family. I couldn't raise children in that house knowing that something like that could come back and attack us. While this was happening, all I could think was there was a werewolf outside of my house that wanted to get in, but after sitting down and doing research of werewolf sightings, I came across the dogman phenomenon. I didn't see either of these features, but Melinda does think that she saw a tail and canine-like legs, so according to you, that means dogman, right? Not a werewolf? I never gave 2 craps about any type of paranormal story that I heard before my encounter. I always just thought it was people making them up to get attention or that they were bona fide crazy. But after that night, I truly became a believer. I never knew my father. He died before I was born. I grew up without a daddy, and if you believe the stories that my granny shared when I was a young man, then you'll believe that he was killed by one of them. He was killed by a dogman. My name is James Barnes. I'm 56 years old. I live in Connecticut. I'm a father of 4, and I have a beautiful wife. This story didn't happen in Connecticut, though. It happened a long time ago in the state of Mississippi. Everyone else that can testify that this story is true are long past. My mom was there, both of my grandparents, but none of them are here anymore. When I was little, I knew that my daddy died, not soon after my mom was done being pregnant with me, but I never knew how he died. That's the story they kept from me, and anytime I asked, they just said he died in an accident. A hunting accident at that. I guess that was good enough for me for the longest time, and I really wasn't keen on knowing the details of how my daddy died. Growing up, it was just my mama, my brother, and myself. My brother's 2 years older than me, and although he was around during the story, he was too little to have witnessed anything for himself. He couldn't remember any of that. Mama was great. She did everything herself. Never left either of us boys wanting. She was always there to love on us and to teach us how to be men. She had to be a mom and a dad. But when I was 12 years old and my brother was 14, Mama got the unfortunate disposition of getting cancer. After she was gone, we went to live with Granny and Papa, and that's how it was until we were young men. And then one night, a few years later, when I was 15 years old, Papa passed away too. A long time after he passed away, Granny actually told me that she thinks the stress that he felt from the night that my dad died never went away, and that's what made his heart weak. I don't know, but what I do know is after the funeral and all that was done, it was just me and Granny one night. My brother was over at a friend's house, and I walked out onto the porch to see Granny smoking one of her cigarettes. She seemed sad and nervous and angry all at once. I sat down with her thinking that she just missed Papa, but she told me she had something to tell me. She told me she wanted to tell me the truth of the hunting accident that took my dad away. I sat down right next to her, eager for some reason to hear what she had to say. After losing Mama and Papa, I guess I just wanted to know more about my family. Now granted, this happened when my brother and I were still in diapers, but Granny remembered it vividly. When that thing started coming around the house, she knew then that nothing good was going to come of it. You see, back then, my mama and my dad lived with Granny and Papa. It was a cabin-type house, away from most people in the city. I guess the first night that thing came around, everything started with the death of both of the dogs that were on the property. They were big breeds, too. Lab and Rottweiler mixes. 2 boys from the same litter that my papa had trained from the time they were pups up until the day they died. They liked to stay outside, those two, even at night, and there was a big doghouse that my dad and Papa actually built together to accommodate these 2 big dogs. I guess what happened was everyone was eating dinner and heard the commotion outside. It sounded like a big fight. Both dogs and something else. Something big. The men of the house ran outside to see what was going on. Whatever had attacked the dogs was gone, but they found one of the dogs already dead and the other in bad shape. Unfortunately, that dog didn't last the night either. The night after that thing came back. That's the night my dad and my papa saw the Wolfman for the first time. From what Granny told me, it was jet black, darker than black even. It walked around on 2 legs like a man, but it was most definitely not a man. They said it was 7 feet tall, at least, and huge in every portion of its body. It had a thick tail like a German Shepherd, and ears like a German Shepherd too, but it had the muzzle that was long and slender like a wolf. That first night they saw that creature, my daddy took a shot at it, but didn't kill it. They think after that, my dad was marked. That this monster wanted its flesh for himself, and it wasn't shy about coming around the house either. This thing would come by all the time. They could hear it running around in the dark, either around the property or the woods that surrounded the property. As it would run, it would bang on trees or uproot little saplings. It would growl or snarl or grunt or even let out these ferocious screams in the forest. Sometimes they'd hear it moving around on the porch, walking around the wood or bumping into the doors or the walls, just making itself known. At that point, everyone was too scared to go outside and deal with it. My mama refused to let my dad go outside to hunt this creature for fear that it would take his life. I guess he should have listened to her. They would also get these strong whiffs of this creature, or at least that's what Granny thought it was that they were smelling. It was this dogman that was tormenting them. They would get these whiffs of musk and pee and bad meat. When those smells would come into the house, sometimes it would happen even with the doors and the windows shut. And that's when they knew this thing was damn close. And they'd go around making sure that all the doors and windows were locked and the guns were loaded. Mama was pretty pregnant with me when it started, and she had me during all of this, but as these encounters kept progressing, she was scared for the lives of my brother and me. Twice, they saw this creature watching them from the wood line. It was always on two legs, and it would just stand half hidden behind the trees, just staring at them like a man would do. Even when they got sight of this creature, it wouldn't scare off. It would just stand there, staring right back at them. It was like this thing was obsessed with my family. And then one night, they heard this thing walking around on the porch again. And once again, it was accompanied by that horrible smell, but this time, the creature was actually using the doorknob, trying to get the door open. Now this act really unnerved Mama. She realized how intelligent this creature was, and she wanted to leave the house the next day for fear that this thing would come inside and kill her family. But for that night, they all stayed in the living room, just waiting and listening for the Wolfman to come back. The next morning, Dad and Papa figured it was time to go looking for this thing, so they got a couple other members of the family that lived near them to come out and hunt through the woods to try and find this Wolfman. But unfortunately, they didn't find anything. According to Granny, though, we think that this creature knew that they were there because after that it seemed the visits became more frequent and even more hostile. The next morning after they went looking for this thing, my Mama and Dad woke up to both grandparents talking loudly in a rush. It appears that when Papa went outside early that morning, he was met with the severed head of a deer right there on the porch. When they were inspecting this poor creature, it looked to them like the Wolfman had caught this deer and simply twisted the head right off its body. They never found the rest of that deer. No carcass, no blood, just the head that was placed there by something smart enough to know to do this as a warning. A couple of nights later, they actually caught this creature looking in one of the windows. Mama was the first to see it. She screamed and even dropped the plate that she was carrying to the dinner table, and it shattered on the floor. My Granny recalled this very vividly. It seemed she remembered the food rolling across the ground as the plate shattered into thousands of pieces, and then she quickly looked from my mom to the window where Mama was pointing and staring, and only caught a glimpse of the back of this creature's head as it darted out of sight. But my Mama had seen the entire thing. When it was looking in, its face was pressed against the window, and she could see the eyes glowing as it stared right inside. After that, my Dad and Papa grabbed the rifles and ran outside to chase this creature off. They took shots at it again, missing this creature, or at least only hitting it in places that weren't fatal. But it seemed after the first time Daddy took a shot at it and wounded it, is when this creature was really pissed off at them. That night, as my mom slept with us boys, the other 3 adults in the house stayed up with the rifles, waiting for this creature to come back. They feared that since we took shots at it again, it would become even more aggressive than it did the first time we shot at it. Luckily, it didn't show itself again that night, but they could hear these awful screams coming from the forest. At that point, as Granny was telling me this story, she was just rocking in her chair, staring off at nothing. She looked like she was shivering to me, and I realized how scared she was just telling this story. Granted, this story was 15 years in the past, but still it seemed to scar her. She paused, reached down and took my hand, brought it up to her, and looked me in the eyes. I'll never forget what she said next. "Jimmy, it sounded like the devil was coming for us out of that forest that night. I've never been that scared the entire time I've been alive. Now, the one thing you have to know about Granny is she was the bravest and strongest person I'd ever met in my entire life. Stronger than Papa, stronger than Mama. I'd never seen her scared. I'd never seen her so spooked. But there she was, staring into my eyes, tears welling up in her own. She told me, as her hand was quivering, that was the night she knew that it wanted to take our lives. I knew she wasn't pulling my leg. I was completely captivated by this story, and I needed to know what happened next. She told me after that thing would come visit almost every single night. They feared it was actually trying to get in one time because as it was jiggling the handle on the front door, it also started banging on the door. It sounded as it was hitting its shoulder to try and bust through the door that night. And that was the point Mama had had enough and vowed that if we survived that night, she was going to get us kids out of there. That banging continued for a little bit, but this thing either gave up or was satisfied with the fright that it gave everybody in the house and disappeared into the night once again. The next morning, Mama made good on her promise. She took my brother and me to her sister's house, and we stayed there for the duration of this encounter. And then that ill-fated night came. One night, after it was just Granny, Papa, and my dad, they saw it on the property again, just strolling along apparently, sniffing around the area a lot, and even sniffing my Papa's old pickup truck. At this point, Daddy had had enough. He wanted his family to be safe, and he wanted them to be home and together. He and Papa grabbed their rifles, ran outside to give chase to this creature again, shooting at it along the way. And again, this creature shrieked at them in that terrifying tone and fled back into the forest. Only this time, Papa and Daddy gave chase. Apparently, as they were running through the woods, according to my Papa, in the memories that he told Granny, he couldn't keep up, and tried to stop my dad, but my dad was determined to finally kill this wolf man. Papa had to stop running because his legs wouldn't go anymore, and his chest was so heavy, but Daddy ran into the forest without him. The last time my Papa saw my Daddy, he was taking shots at this creature, and then disappeared into the thickness of the trees. That was the last time anyone saw my dad. All they ever found was his gun. There was never a trace of blood or clothing. They never found a body. It's like the forest swallowed him up without any trace. After that, Mama never came back to the cabin with us boys, and even though they searched for weeks, they called off the search because there was no sign of my dad. Papa and Granny ended up selling the house not too long after that, and that's when they moved to Connecticut to be near Granny's sister. Mama took us boys with her, and that's where we lived ever since. And that's the story of how my dad died. Granny died a long time after this, but still a long time ago now. Another thing that you have to know about Granny is I never knew her to be a liar, or someone that would make up a story just to hoax somebody. The look on her face that night, the way she told me that my dad died, the sadness of those memories that she was recounting, they all make me believe that everything she said was 100% true. Granny would never fabricate a story talking about her son's death. I've never seen one of these creatures myself, nor do I plan on ever seeing one of these creatures myself. If you believe the story that Granny told me that night, then this creature has already taken enough from me. I'm not going out into the forest looking for one of these and risking the same fate as my dad. It's taken me a long time to actually record this for you, and even talking about it now disturbs me. I've never told my kids about this, nor have I told my wife. The only person I've ever talked to about it is my brother, when Granny told him the truth too. The dog man ruined our lives. The least I can do is share the story of what happened. The only thing I can do is tell you that I believe this story to be true, and that things like this really exist.